Oh, sorry, man. Yeah, yeah. Sorry. Good to see you. Happy New Year. Sorry, guys. My apologies that we are not so fashionably, but we are late. It's my fault because we arranged to meet up at a tiny restaurant in Angel Station, and then they had to wait for me, and we have to wait for the bill, and then we have to walk here. So, those are not excuses. The fact is, you got to blame me. You should blame me. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce our panelists, and then we start right away after that. Evan, okay. So I think we don't need introductions for Mr. Toki Chip Chow. And Mr. Evan Fowler, in case you don't recognize him, any one of you have bought the book written by Nathan Law? Quite a few, right? He's a co-writer, so give him a hand. Evan is also originally from Hong Kong, and he's truly bilingual and educated in the UK as well. So today we're going to talk about cultural Hong Kong, the past, the present, and the future. And we have three speakers or panelists here. Both Evan and Chip were educated in the UK, originally from Hong Kong. And I am the uneducated man who was from Hong Kong, but only worked here as a second-class citizen in the 80s. So we at least we have something in common, right? So now we are all in the UK, or we consider ourselves here for good. So we want to reflect back on what it used to be, the cultural life of Hong Kong. What does it mean to be presently in the United Kingdom? What is the future for us Hong Kongers? And then we would have, every one of us would talk about their own experience, whatever they want to say, for 10 to 20 minutes. And after that, we have a free structured discussion among the panelists. And after that, we'll open to the floor for Q&A. And this thing is expected to have to close in 2 hours' time. But I think nobody is rushing us, and nobody's doing that sign to me. And then we will continue on with a little bit of overrun. So without further ado, Mr. Chip Chow and Mr. Fowler. Thank you, Chip. Yeah. And then, I did not have the mic. Do I need the one? Right. So I think it's quite clear. There's not much like the rules we have here. So any one of you want to start? Like Chip? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I think it's on.
Hello. It's the second time that I give a bit of a sharing in London on Hong Kong. And this time it's a very interesting and unique one for me because actually I didn't know that Hong Kong was technically founded on the 26th of January of 1841, right, until a couple of weeks ago. Because when I used to read history, my history textbooks when I was young, I was always confused when Hong Kong was ceded to Britain. Some said it was 1840, some said Hong Kong was founded in 1841, and some said Hong Kong was born on 1842. So it's a good time. It's a good thing for me to realize that the Hong Kong date of birth was 25th, right?
26.
26th of
Well,
January.
there are two sayings. Some people said
Yeah.
they landed on the 25th,
Yeah.
but they raised the Union Jack on the 26th.
That's right.
Yeah.
Of January 1841.
Yes.
They're right. And I knew that the location was the possession point, somewhere near Saigon, on the west.
It's
of,
closer to Shanghai.
Yeah, closer to Sheung-Wan, on the west of the Hong Kong island. That's why I think one of the oldest roads constructed on the island was Victoria Road. That's where Cyberport is. Because that road was named after Queen Victoria, who got onto the throne in 1839. Right? So Hong Kong was acquired under her name only after 2 years. She became queen. Right?
That's right.
So she was very young. I think she was barely around 29 or 30 when she was told the news that Baron Rock had been acquired by an eccentric seller called Captain Elliot, right? And she was wondering what it was. So where Hong Kong was, and Captain Elliot had a bit of a fallout with other British colonials, as legends have it. Contrary to the general demonized portrayal of Captain Elliot being the soul or the arch-imperialist buccaneer who bullied the Qing dynasty of China and got Hong Kong from China. He was a rather moderate character.
Yeah.
He was, I think he was a seller and he was a merchant, but at the same time he held some liberal values, right? And he was against a full-scale war between Britain and the Qing Empire at that time. Although at the outset, at the beginning, he was quite hardline, or he was quite a hardliner dealing with the Qing government about the acquisition, the forced acquisition of the cargoes of the opium. But when the dust settled, and he said enough is enough, right? I think the British aggression should stop somewhere there. Let's acquire this island and sign this peace agreement with the Qing dynasty. And at that time, I think back in London, I think Lord Palmerston, who was the foreign secretary, with some real, hawkish British diplomats and military men, and thought that, well, I mean, something more should have been done. Instead of just getting the Hong Kong island, why didn't Captain Elliot get the Zhoushan Islands, off the Yangtze River as well? Because at that time, I think the East Indian Company and some other British settlers were more interested in Shanghai and the Yangtze River, because the Yangtze River was the main route of shipping tea leaves and porcelain out to the town of Zhenjiang, and then got onto the ship to get them all the way via the Malacca, Strait of Malacca, and then to Britain. So Hong Kong was, in their eyes, not the best choice, right? And it was just an island, and Captain Elliot was told off, right, for his not following the instructions laid down at least by the foreign secretary or some Palmerston and other hawkish military leaders, to get more land, right, at least from China, right? So, and he was sacked. He was recalled back to London, and then Pottinger was sent to Hong Kong instead. That's why technically, I think there's a Pottinger Street in the central, but we don't have a street or road named after Captain Elliot.
No Elliot.
That's the first example of injustice being done to the poor man. to him rather than to the Qing dynasty, to the Qing Empire, right? To say it most politically incorrectly. So Pottinger came and arrived in Hong Kong and became the first governor of Hong Kong officially. And then more British troops arrived together with merchants, and settlers, and they had difficulty with handling pandemics, tropical pandemics in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong was later known as the graveyard of the white man, right? because of rats and cockroaches hopping around, and then followed by the most notorious Black Death pandemic on the Hong Kong island a few decades later, resulting in the famous Cantonese saying "Sai Taiping Day," washing off streets and roads of peace, right? Yeah. And with a temple there on Taiping San Gai, near the hospitals, right? Later built by a charity of Donghua Samyun or whatever. So the real Hong Kong story started from there, geographically and historically, from a man called Captain Elliot. Right? And since then, it's been booming, and it's been flourishing into a beautiful hybrid of East and West, Eastern and Western cultures, and famous with legends and stories and characters like Susie Wong, the Noble House, Jardine and Matheson and whatever, and the rest is history. Right? And then came the first successful merchant, right? It was Ho Tong's father, right? Who was a Dutch Jewish, right? And I think his name was Bosman. He had been rambling without a job between England and Europe until one day he heard that there had been a bit of coolies shipment between Taishan, and via the Pearl River Delta all the way to America for the railway construction projects. And that was not until, I think, 1860 or 61. So Bosman came to Hong Kong, I think in the late 1850s. And he married a legendary woman, right, all the way from Shanghai. And they gave birth to the first famous historical character, and a legendary man called Ho Tong. Ho Tong was born in 1862, and he became the first native tycoon in connection with the birth of Hong Kong. Right? And that's why you have a Ho Tong Road in Kowloon. He still left behind some schools and hospitals. But the Ho Tong family gave up Hong Kong as early as in 1980s, right? Because they didn't trust the communist regime. They didn't think the CCP would stick to its promise of one country, two systems. For once, they were laughed at by other Hong Kong and foreign investors for their making the wrong choice, because Hong Kong did flourish a bit after 1997 for a good 20 years because of Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin's policies of one country, two systems being quite effectively implemented until what has been happening to Hong Kong in the past 3 years. So the rest is history, right? Yeah. So I hope that would be enough for a brief introduction if I haven't been talking too much.
Thank you, Jim. Never too much. Thank you. And since I'm the moderator, so I can decide with dictatorship here, I would be the one who has the last word. Evan.
Okay, well, thank you, Chip, for I think sort of outlining it, Hong Kong's history and certainly sort of giving it one particular take on that. I suppose in way of a introduction, I'm a Hong Kong Eurasian, and I'd probably, to be more accurate, sort of specify a certain type of Hong Kong Eurasian who grew up in Hong Kong in the 80s and 90s, and for whom I think Hong Kong was a home. So I wasn't necessarily sort of the expat Eurasian brat, but someone I think who had deeper roots in the city. So the way I sort of viewed Hong Kong is I think sort of reflected in that. I mean, it's interesting actually, just sort of coming to the UK, because as I suppose all of us have well, not all of us here, but probably a good number of us here have made the decision to leave Hong Kong, to leave our home, and to move to a place which has a strong historic association with Hong Kong, but of course is different. And one of the things which I'd like to just maybe speak a little bit about is being a Eurasian, sort of what it means, how that's actually sort of changed over time as well. In that regards, I think I'll be speaking a little bit more about, again, without sort of going into any details of my family, but certainly how different generations of my family have thought about their relationship with Hong Kong, and also have thought about being Eurasian and how that is changing. And finally, to just offer some reflections on some of the concerns looking forward that I think many Eurasians, when they see what's happened to Hong Kong sort of recently, and also the trajectory that China is going, where that leaves us. So just to begin with, it's a funny thing in the sense that identity is not something that you have. I mean, even when we sort of talk about Hong Kong, we talk about Hong Kong history. I mean, the reality is, things are constantly progressing. So the way I understand Hong Kong is that Hong Kong had a history before the British came. It had a history when the British were there, and it has a history when the British left, and it has a history now, actually, post NSL. And what's happened is during the colonial time, was Hong Kong a predominantly Chinese city? Yes, but what it meant to be Chinese was quite different. Hong Kong has always been a city that attracted people. It attracted many people coming in from all parts of China, but it also attracted a international set, a group of people who came to Hong Kong, maybe not always sort of relating to Hong Kong as a local, but many of those people stayed and formed those type of bonds. Actually, the international set in Hong Kong can be quite similar in the way they relate to Hong Kong as many of the Chinese immigrants who came to Hong Kong. So just to sort of outline it in a little story, I remember before when I was living in Hong Kong, I occasionally got asked to go to schools to talk about identity. I'd spent several years running a project, looking at how Hong Kong people identify. And it was very interesting. When I would go to the international schools and I would ask students there, I would say, in what way is Hong Kong diverse, multicultural? They would say, oh, well, in Hong Kong we have people from all over the world. We've got people from France, we've got people from Britain, from Australia, and then we have the Chinese as one big category. When you go and ask that same question in a lot of local schools, the answer was quite different. It was, oh, we're very diverse. We have people from Toisan, from Chiujiao, from all these different places in China. And then we have the Guailou, one category. And when you think about this immigration, this movement, this sort of coming together of identity, you know, Hong Kong, for most of its history, effectively didn't have a border. It was an open border, something that would be very shocking to many British people today. A lot of the people who came to Hong Kong chose to come. They weren't there and, you know, suffering under the colonial, you know, yoke. They were people who, you know, frankly, were saying, well, you know, in Hong Kong there's opportunities. It didn't mean they liked the British, but there were opportunities there, and they moved there. Very much like the expatriate crowd, or some of the expatriate crowd. You know, people who came to Hong Kong because they felt that was the right decision to make. A lot of these people came, whether they were expatriate or the Chinese immigrants, they came there thinking, Hong Kong is a place for me to work, and then I will return back to my hometown in China. Or if you were an expatriate, I would return back to Britain, back to, again, my home country. So this very clear distinction that, you know, sometimes people make between, you know, oh, well, if you're a local Hong Kong Chinese, or if you're an expatriate, you are so different. I don't think it really holds up, and that was really sort of my feeling. And then, of course, you had the Eurasians, who were, you know, sort of a product, we can sort of say, of this mix. And for me, I always sort of think back, and you know, there was, on the one side, there was always a certain privilege about being Eurasian. So certainly in the 80s and 90s, which I think were quite a heyday, you were sort of seen by both communities as something somewhat exotic. You were obviously I was speaking to a Eurasian girl who I knew at school, and she was saying to me, she said, oh, do you know, we were so spoilt being Eurasian girls because everyone thought the Eurasian girls were the best looking girls. There was a certain sort of privilege that you kind of felt in being different, which is actually not unlike what we see in multicultural cities like London, where quite often a lot of Londoners will look for something that makes them different, that makes them sort of stand out. Also, sort of as a Eurasian, I know a lot of Eurasian friends who sort of tapped in quite naughtily, into the privilege of that difference. It was quite normal for certain Eurasians who, not necessarily ones I mixed with, but there were some who would sort of say, well, I'm going to go, I'm going to go and have a spa treatment at a certain hotel in Hong Kong. Why can I walk in and why can I use the pool? Because they're not going to question me. Funnily enough, those same sort of Eurasians tend to be the ones who are also quite often most reluctant to leave Hong Kong. It's sort of the thought of losing that sort of privilege. But then that was very much the case, I think, in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. But then if you go back in the past, I mean, one thing that I always found interesting was, if talking to sort of older relatives, and these are people who sort of grew up in post-war Hong Kong, the Eurasian identity wasn't so strong. You had, even amongst the big wealthy Eurasian families, some of the Eurasians would choose to identify more as British. Some would choose to identify actually more as being Chinese. Interesting enough, that predominantly they chose to identify more as being sort of British because I think they felt it sort of served their interests better. That, of course, I think was sort of reflective of that particular time period. So we sort of see, the confidence in the Eurasian identity changed through time from, I think a period during the colonial period when people were not so sure. The colonial attitude, I have to stress, not only came in that period from, the British sort of colonial society, but it also came from the Chinese society. many Eurasians in the past chose to identify as being British and tried to hide their Chinese identity because they were not accepted within the Chinese community. Because frankly, they were treated, with great suspicion. They were treated with, at times, quite a lot more hostility and racism than they were by the British. It was a case of, the British may patronise. We may be on another sort of rung of the ladder when it comes to sort of seeking promotion, because we're not being brought out from the mother country. But it was, try getting promotion in one of the Chinese trading houses. So it was sort of reflective of the time period. And then, of course, now, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think since recent developments in Hong Kong, I think all of us can sort of feel that what it means to be sort of a Hong Kong person, the power to sort of choose our own identity, to choose, the things that we choose to value, in a way is sort of being taken away. We're sort of being told what we are. I mean, I think a lot of you here are here because you do identify, let's say, as being Hong Kong Chinese, but you're very clear that, that identity of yours, your Chinese roots, shouldn't be defined by a party. It shouldn't be defined by politics. And for the Eurasians, one of the things which I'm sort of hearing in my family, which I never kind of thought I would hear, are questions like, in this new China, where there is a very strong sense of ethno-nationalism, can we ever be Chinese enough? Will we always be a little bit like, the old colonial Hongs, like HSBC? No matter how much we do for China, no matter how on board we are with your message, no matter how much we strive for, and try and play your system, we will never fully belong. There will always be that cachet. So just like HSBC, no matter what they do, no matter how they try to expand their operations in China and their investments in China, the reality is, politically, they are always, that scapegoat because they're not a Chinese company, no matter how hard they try. And I think that's something which is a great shame, because I think Hong Kong and the celebration of Hong Kong from, certainly in its colonial period, was that Hong Kong took a new route. It was an inclusive route, by and large. It was a route where, I think how we chose to identify, whether we came from different parts of the globe or whether we came from different parts of China, was really left to us. And I think as that changes now, we're all sort of struggling with these. But anyway, that's my contribution.
Thank you, Evan. It's interesting that what the previous guest mentioned, actually, you stole words from my mouth, because I was trying to say that for the ethnic Chinese in Hong Kong, no matter how you want to make a choice for yourself, decide or identify with this or that, you cannot change the fact that 90% or maybe more of you or your ancestry, they are all immigrants, right? Because when I did my book on the history of Hong Kong, we have no dispute that Hong Kong was founded on the 26th of January, 1841. And Captain Elliot, he did something very typical of the British. He did two things. He did the census, and then he did sell some land, right? Land auction. What else did they do? So they had the land auction right before he was fired by Palmerston, and he also did the census. At that time, the population of Hong Kong was less than 10,000 people. But at the time when we took over new territories with the new lease of 99 years in 1898, the population of Hong Kong had become already more than 200,000. So a little bit of simple calculations. 7,000 people, 5,000 people in 1841. You cannot multiply, you cannot just reproduce among yourselves and become 200,000, okay? So basically, we have loads and loads of immigrants from China. Now, put yourself in those ancestors and just imagine you're one of them from the Kwangtung province. You may be naive, you may be uneducated, you may be illiterate, but when you're from Sam Sui, Pun Yu, or whatever, Toi San, everywhere, you know full well that those were not the Chinese territories. There's a Union Jack over there. When you go there, you have the right men who rule this place, and you become second-class citizen. But you, nevertheless, you came here. You voted with your feet. So basically, I would say the expatriates were immigrants, but also the Chinese were predominantly immigrants. So you were not the original indigenous people who owned this place. You actually knowingly tried to be British in one way or the other. In some sense, you became British. You forfeit your Chinese nationality. But that trend actually went on and on and on, because we have the Taiping rebels in the 50s of the 19th century, and then we have the Boxers, and we have the Revolution, and we have famines in China, then we have the Second World War. You know, the Second World War broke out in China in 1937. At that time, Japan was not at war with Britain. They were, in a way, they were allies. So Shanghai and Hong Kong were both safe and regarded as safe because it's protected by the European powers. So those people who lost their home because of the war in China, they actually fled to Hong Kong. Though the Hong Kong population exploded to more than 2 million. And most of these people are from China. Now, this is something funny that the British did since the establishment of the colony until 1950, which is what just Avid said. The policy is racist. As long as you are Chinese, ethnic Chinese, if you come from the border of the Kwangtung province into Hong Kong, they would not have any control or any kind of immigration restrictions. Infinity is welcome. So that explains it. But if you are not, if you are, say, Japanese or maybe Korean, and you came to Hong Kong through an ocean island, then they do have passport control. But as long as you are ethnic Chinese and you came from the mainland, you just come in. And if you want to leave Hong Kong, you can always leave. And that explains why, even though we have created a different culture in Hong Kong, we did not create a different identity, because there's so much freedom at the border for ethnic Chinese to go in and out. And a lot of people have relatives and homeland, ancestry, or the graveyards of their ancestors, somewhere in Kwangtung or whatever, just like most of them are from Kwangtung, but because of that convenience and that kind of no control and restriction for the ethnic Chinese, they always thought that they were Chinese rather than a different identity of Hong Kong. But that actually changed politically after the revolution in China in 49. And then that, at the time, the governor, I think is Alexander Grantham, he had to, I think it was Mark Yang first that they have, I think then they would, Alexander Grantham, they have to close the border, because at that time they would be totally out of control. Because now we have a revolution like you've never seen before, and we have the people fleeing the mainland, and then we just cannot accept so many people. So the long and short of the story is, after the establishment of the People's Republic of China, Hong Kong and China, the mainland, became totally separate, and they did not. There's no contact between the two until I would say after the death of Mao. Well, we have some kind of visits, but it was very tight control. as we all know, I mean, I'm speaking from my own experience. It's not easy actually to go there because the People's Liberation Army actually check you everything. We had to bring a lot of stuff for our poor relatives in China, and every one of us would wear like 5 pants, you know. And then you have the worn-out pants on the outside, and then you have the new ones in the inside. You went in, and then you gave them everything to them, you know. So if you have a watch, you have a pen, a fountain pen, everything was marked. So the travel and the sort of communication between the two communities has been not as it used to be before. So that Hong Kong sort of slowly became very much independent in a very large sense. So what I'm trying to say is that for the ethnic Chinese, just like any other kind of animals, if you have like when Charles Darwin was observing the finches in Galapagos, they have so many islands in Galapagos. With the finches, they obviously came from the single ancestry, but they have the beaks different, they have the feathers different, the whole feature of the bird different. If you separate two the same animal for a long enough time, they would become different species. So we are not different species, we have different culture. So here I would very briefly share with you what I think about what you mean by culture. Now, I met some new friends from France, from Paris, and I think I don't speak French, only very little. But everybody is familiar with French wine. You know, they have the best wine in the world, I believe. And the way they cultivate the vineyard, to grow the grapes, they look at 3 elements of how you make the best vintage. The first thing is actually the climate, right? The weather. And the second thing, I don't know what you call it in French, maybe I pronounce it incorrectly, is the terroir, is the land. And the third thing is your cultivation. So if I translate that into Chinese, 講返啲人話就係天地人. Okay? So the French philosophy and the Chinese philosophy were very much the same. Is that if you want to make the best wine, you really have to depend on the weather. Well, has been a dry year with a lot of sun, with a lot of rain, whether the summer and very long summer and very severe winter, it actually changed the way the grapes are. Sometimes too much rain, too much sun may not be a good thing. You need to have a dry season, very tough, and then you have a very poor harvest, and you have a lot of sugar in the grapes, and then maybe they would have good wine. And also this vintage for that year would be very limited, right? So it's not like what you think. It's more complicated than that. And then you have a lot of work to cultivate, to sort of nourish, to kind of grow, and then you need a lot of care and maybe not too much care though. So that human effort to sort of nourish the culture and continue generations after generations has also been very important. 人為嘅力量, the man's effort, very important. So you have the sky, the land, and the people. And then I would say, because if you look at Hong Kong now, we had a very distinguished sort of harbor and an area with the landscape and everything. We have people living in different places. And then it's shocking that we have less than 400 square miles and we have beautiful beaches and we have country parks. Now that we're losing them maybe because they want to build a lot of housing in all the country parks. But then we have urban area, then we have the rural areas, we have people, we have farmlands. We used to have a lot of farmlands. And here, you check with Calvin, we have this show of a Hong Kong festival. Not a lot of people know that the pineapple used to be our native product in Hong Kong, in Chuen Wan. You know, we had our own pineapples, and then we make this symbolically representing the new territories who use the pineapples. And then we also have lychee, longan, everything, right? When I was a kid, I'm much older than and a lot of you here. Not maybe we're same age, Teresa. Yeah. I'm sorry, you're younger than me. My father told me that if you want to 食嗰啲絲苗，最靚嘅就係元朗米。The 元朗 rice is the best, but we don't have that anymore. So that makes Hong Kong, right? The soil, the weather, and the people that made Hong Kong. So the problem now is that we have the people. We don't care about the weather that much, but we are going to plant everything on different soil. So here I want to have a discussion among ourselves how we can carry on the future cultural development of Hong Kong with a different land, with a different Torah, right? So thank you. So here we're going to do is that we will have 10 to 20 minutes the discussion among the three of us, and the rest of it we open the floor. Then we have Q&A. We have talking to all the people around here in a very unorganized way. Okay. So anyone of you want to?
Yeah, Gordon underlined a very unique recipe of the success and the flourishing of Hong Kong. You know, there was this climate, land, and about this people plus management, right? You know, management. I think it was the most important factor. How? Now you're given the island, deep water, harbor, you know, flank between the Lion Rock on one side and Peak on the other side. It's the best geography on earth. When you look at the map, compare Hong Kong with Singapore, and then with Gibraltar, and then with the Panama Canal, right? These are all strategic spots on this tiny planet where traffic have been, and travelings and trading have been allowed to flow freely for up to 500 years. It was such a marvelous choice on the part of Captain Elliot, you know, pointing at Hong Kong, the Hong Kong island, rather than the Zhoushan Islands, you know, of the Yangtze River Delta. Right? It was just a, you know, it was I don't know, it was such an accidental choice by such a man whose name has been forgotten by most people, I think, in this country. Yeah. Right? Plus the management. What did the management consist of? The British rule of law, the spirit of fair play, and the spirit of tolerance and freedom. Right? Very few people know that before 1950, the governors of Hong Kong had been allowed, or well, they had been free to travel from Hong Kong since the construction of the railway between between Kowloon and Guangzhou. That's why it was called Gao Guang Tilu, the Kowloon Canton Railway, right? Built at the beginning of the 20th century. Alexander Grantham, very much like taking a weekend off, getting on the train, and went to Canton to have dim sum there, you know, in Shanghai, you know, Saigon or whatever, and then met some local Canton officials, chatting about Kennedy's opera, you know, Chinese culture, you know, steamed fish, you know, and dim sum or whatever, and how's life getting on in Canton? Do you have many bandits, you know, right? Gangsters and whatever? And then spent overnight there and came back in the evening of Sunday and get back to the government house to work until 1952, the border was closed down, right? So there was no border, you know, and up till then, for decades, Hong Kong people would not think of a specific identity because it had been a part of Canton province. Cantonese opera was shared so pleasantly between the provincial capital of Guangzhou and Hong Kong and Macau. There were Cantonese opera singers like Si Gok-sin and Ma Si-zhang, and the broadcaster, the storyteller Lei Ngor, traveling freely between Guangzhou, Foshan, and then Hong Kong, and also the legends of the Kung Fu legends of Wang Fei Hong. How do you define Wang Fei Hong? Is he a hero of Hong Kong cinema, or is he a legend of the southern Canton province? So it's been such a rich, crystallized product of what you call globalization. I think it was the product of the second wave of globalization. The first wave of globalization was created more or less by the Spanish, by Columbus, who landed in North America, resulting in, what happened? The whole the occupation, which went rather, brutal, of the Latin America, right? And leading to what you call the Magellan Galley. It was such a great, seafaring route, trading silks and porcelain from the coast of Fujian via the Philippines, right? Via Manila, and then across the Pacific, all the way to Spain. There was such an epic journey, the Magellan Galley, and that was done by the Spanish. That's why you have a community of up to 3 million of Fujian Chinese still in Manila, in the Philippines, and they were left behind by the Spanish. Right? It's exactly the same, very similar. Hong Kong was a second, a more successful and more attractive Manila, right, next to with British taking up the adventurous and the trading role next to the Spanish after the Spanish Armada was destroyed by Queen Elizabeth I. So it was the second empire, more or less roughly, so the second globalization. What we witness and experience now is the third rate of globalization. So Hong Kong was born at the right timing, when the second wave of globalization began. Right, when tea leaves, porcelain, and silk were very much in demand, and had been very much in demand in Europe. These three luxury commodities started coming out from China when it was under the Ming Empire, as early as that, right? Because the Philippines, but via Philippines, the Spanish had a cut of those commodities via the Philippines, and then they became so popular in Europe, and Britain and France joined in later, right? They want to get rid of the commission in between, by the agents like the Spanish or the Dutch, in Amsterdam, or even the Arabs. So they decided to reach out by themselves to the Far East.
Because I'm very eager to add on what Chip said, because a lot of us, especially the educated people, have this resentment about money. The people who are rich are bad, right? But if you look at the development of Hong Kong, it has everything to do with money. Because Napoleon famously said, the Brits are nothing but just a bunch of shopkeepers. This is a nation of shopkeepers. Because the French, they have this glorious plan for betterment of mankind, universal human right and all these glorious things. But the Brits only wanted to trade. But you see, the reason why Hong Kong was unique and special was specifically because of that. Now, there were some bad things that actually beget good things. Because I think in the days of Qianlong, he was very skeptical of the foreigners. So he did not want to have the influence of these Europeans or whoever they may from the oceans. So there was Yat Hao Tong Xiang. They only allow one trading port in the whole of China, And guess what it was? Canton, Guangzhou. So because of that, all the money that went in and prospered through the trade had to stay in Guangzhou. And the Cantonese, that's why the Cantonese are the most open-minded, the most friendly to the foreigners, and the most, I would say, savvy in trade. Now, because of that, that's why Eliot and his colleagues thought it's a much better idea to open up Hong Kong than to get the Zhoushan Guangdong so far away. Because the problem with trading in Canton is that you have very hostile legal system for the Europeans. They could only stay for half a year. They could not take their wives with them, and they were always harassed by the local officials. So now that you have the Union Jack hoisted in Hong Kong, you have a Victoria City in Hong Kong, so in the proximity of Canton, and you can trade continuously with Canton and the rest of China through Canton, but then all the expatriates can live peacefully and with security and protection of the Royal Navy. Now, because of that, those savvy merchants from Canton, they all moved to Hong Kong. Right? So a lot of people said Hong Kong was developed from a fishing village. That was totally wrong. Because from day one, Victoria City was not a fishing village. It was an urbanized, cosmopolitan city that was built by the colonial imperial British to the highest standard. You look at these old buildings in our Victoria Harbour, Queen's Building, King's Building, Princess Building. They were like Victorian and Edwardian architecture, the same as you see in Regent Street and Oxford Circus or whatever, Windsor Palace. I mean, it's the same thing. It's very elegantly built. The only thing that remains now, I think, is the original Supreme Court, which is now the Court of the Final Appeal. You see those kind of buildings, glamorous, grandeur, imperial buildings from the colonial days. Apart from that, the people also have the villas in the mid-levels and the resorts. I mean the cottages in the south side of the island, because we have the money. So the money is there, the trade is there, the legal system protected us, and that's why we prosper. With the ingenious Cantonese people, now they feel free to actually make the money and keep the money and pass on to our next generations. And that's what happened. So do not resent money, do not resent riches. And that was what made Hong Kong tick. And the other thing is because of the way that we have this harmony in Hong Kong, we do have the poor people in Hong Kong, and then the colonial government encouraged the people to not so much social welfare, but establish hospitals for those helpless and then people in the bottom of the society. That's why we have Tung Wah Hospital. Now, a lot of people donate this money for charity, not because they actually have this kind heart. It's because they want to look good among their peers, and because for the upper society, this is where to see and to be seen as some of the Tung Wah Hospital benefactors, right? 三院總理. So, but that worked because that keep the society together, and also without taxing the people, without all this high tax and welfare, without too much of the bureaucracy, the people can organize their own charity, their own hospitals, their own schools, and do everything themselves.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to comment on money and wealth. I don't think it's an area I'm qualified to speak on. No, but what I really sort of want to add to is just sort of to focus on this understanding of Hong Kong as, you know, not as a static place, but as a place that's constantly evolving, and you know, to dispel, I think, some of the misunderstandings and the myths that I think a lot of people sort of hold. And you know, I'm not going to go as far back as what was happening with the establishment of Hong Kong. I mean, certainly my understanding was Hong Kong was actually pretty quiet for the first sort of 20, 30 years. I mean, it really sort of only took off in the late 19th century, and that's actually why you see these late Victorian Edwardian buildings that were being built there. And of course, they are grand because, you know, we have to understand it within the context of the time. You know, I mean, the reality was the British Empire was being held together. Huge generalization here, but you know, I think it carries quite a bit on bluff. You know, there was a big part in, you know, ceremony, protocol, having certain buildings, having certain marches and things, you know, and the architecture in the buildings of certainly up to the 1930s, you really sort of see that. But then, of course, interestingly with Hong Kong, was when you look at government buildings that were being built from the 1950s onward, you had a totally different reimagining of authority. Buildings went from being designed to be grand, to project imperial power, to actually being functional. And what a lot of people don't realize, I mean, if you look at central government offices in Hong Kong, they were designed to basically mimic the new public housing that was going up. It was an architectural symbol of a new type of relationship because, of course, Britain post-war was also a very, very different country in the 40s and the 50s. Of course, when I was in Hong Kong, I was also involved with some of the campaigning to preserve some of these buildings, and there was this talk of the Hong Kong government wanting to sort of move into grade 1 offices being built right on the harbour. And of course, the point I was making around that was, symbolically, what does that say? I mean, that's, again, almost one of the great ironies, I think, that we've seen in Hong Kong is, I think we can, honestly sort of say, a new type of colonial relationship is actually being created, being imposed. But I want to come back to sort of this point that a lot of Hong Kong's growth, a lot of Hong Kong's sort of success, hasn't been. It wasn't just a case that Hong Kong had nothing. We borrowed a lot. People moved. People came into Hong Kong because it had something. I think a very good example of that was look at what happened in the 50s. Look what happened when the communists took over. Hong Kong boomed. Because, and I'm sure all of us here can think of lots of companies and lots of families who fall into this category, because you had a mass exodus of capital, of experience, and of labour from Shanghai. Shanghai totally eclipsed Hong Kong for most of its history. Hong Kong was a backwater for the vast majority of its history. Hong Kong, even within the colonial office, Hong Kong was, for a lot of its history, a bit of it was second, third, fourth tier. Hong Kong was not really defendable. If the Chinese really wanted to take it back, they essentially always could. But Hong Kong succeeded. And for me, the critical thing here was because of the rule of law, because of the type of place that Hong Kong was allowed to evolve, because it was a crown colony, because it wasn't, unlike Shanghai, it was subject to British law. People came. I think Gordon's absolutely right. Hong Kong people didn't. It wasn't just Hong Kong people who built Hong Kong. Hong Kong also had something about it that could attract people to come there, attract people predominantly from China. And now I wrote a book a few years ago when it's a little story I like to say, which I think worries me about the UK. In this book, I was sort of mentioning how people came to Hong Kong, and how in 1997 people were actually quite concerned about what would happen when essentially a authoritarian power, albeit one that seemed to be liberalizing, would take over a city like Hong Kong, built on the type of openness and values that Hong Kong had, relative openness. The drafts came back, and it was sent off to sort of a reader to have a look. who they thought the book would appeal to, and it came back and it said, this doesn't make any sense, from a modern British perspective, because why would people move to live under British colonialism, oppressive British colonialism? Well, remember, there's many different forms of oppression that are happening all over the world, and some forms of oppression are actually less oppressive than others. And I think one of the things we kind of sort of forget about, with Hong Kong as it's gone back to China, is that again, is Hong Kong geographically, we could say, part of China? Well, it kind of looks that, in the same way that Northern Ireland is geographically part of Ireland. Does that mean the people of Northern Ireland have no say in their future? Does that mean Northern Ireland doesn't have its own distinct roots, its own distinct memories, its own distinct differences from the rest of Ireland? Is it right for, let's say, the Irish to simply, overall, they can say, we have this ideal of one Ireland. I really shouldn't go too deep into this, but the parallels I'm sort of trying to make here, I think, are important. And even when it comes, when we talk about being Chinese, remember, being Chinese, like being British, is something that is constantly evolving, that is changing. Being French, the French, of all people, let's not forget 100 years ago how many languages were spoken in France, and how few French people spoke French. What it means to be Chinese changes, and actually a confident, a successful country, a successful politics is able to embrace that difference, embrace that change. And just to give a little bit of personal history, my family, in '97, we chose very firmly to stay in Hong Kong because we believed not only in Hong Kong, but we also believed in China. We believed, I was educated here. I was also educated in Beijing. I travelled in Europe. I travelled in China. I don't think there's anything wrong, because for me, China isn't the Communist Party. Maybe that is something in the mix. I'm not going to deny that. But it's not for the Communist Party to define China and the Chinese and Hong Kong, in much the same way it would be totally wrong for Boris Johnson to define what it means to be British, let alone Boris Johnson to define what it means to be a Hong Konger. So we are in this, it's very easy for us, and I think especially in the West, for a lot of people to sort of get into this narrative that, colonialism was a modern nation going off to another nation, to another people, imposing itself on there, oppressing them, and decolonization has to be great because they're being kicked out. No, decolonization happened because I think progress has been made. What was acceptable 100 or 200 years ago should be unacceptable now, and I firmly believe that. But then if you believe that, if you believe people's opinions matter, then you should also be greatly concerned with the way and the type of relationship that Beijing is imposing on Hong Kong. And indeed, I would then extend it and say, remember, Beijing is also doing a lot to set the new standards, global standards, of how we understand power, of technology standards moving forward. And I think these are something I'm not going to say they're bad or wrong, but I think these are things we should care about.
I think we can open up to the floor and we continue to discuss until somebody stops us from doing it or throw us out, right? So would anybody like to have a question or like to say something?
Thank you, Gordon, for exposing my identity and my age. I'm quite open about it. In 2 days' time, I would have been here 50 years, living in UK. And so I have some experience as parents and living in this country. first of all, this is my husband. So we have Eurasian children. My eldest is 41 this year, and my youngest is 35. I like to bring some encouragement to all the young family who brought the children in this country. Have confidence in them. Let them express themselves. I know we always maintain our Chinese culture, our way of teaching. I can be a very strict mom, but I learned my lessons through them, with them. I get quite red faces sometimes because there's things they, tell me that, Mum, you're wrong. But yesterday I spent a day with my youngest, 35, and she had a whole lot of Eurasian or Chinese background or all kind of Asian children about similar age. And they are wonderful, wonderful young people. They all maintain, even though some of them are second or even third generation Chinese, born in this country. They maintain that identity in their own way, but they also completely immerse into the English way or British way of life. And they're very concerned, they know their background, and they are all very polite young people. And doing lots of good, and and learning to play mahjong, which I think is completely different thinking. I was brought up in Hong Kong. My parents wouldn't even let me in the room with people playing mahjong because the thing about mahjong is it has the reputation of gambling. But this generation, they all love the game. They appreciate the culture. They don't play with money, and they just have huge fun. And my daughter was one of them, teaching them, because we used to play when we're at home. What I'm saying is, they will grow in their own pace. They will maintain the Asian culture, but also they will have their freedom. They will think differently. They might be sort of outspoken, but let them be. And be relaxed. I know Asian parents are very concerned about their academic achievement and all that. But with our strong identity, we will ensure them they will grow up very young, lovely, new sort of generation of Asian or Hong Kongers. And they all identify themselves that background. So let's relax about it. They will be a wonderful young generation. I really look forward to all these young people growing up in this country have their own way of thinking and achieving their own goals. They don't have to be doctors. He's a doctor. None of my children want to be doctors. My eldest opened a dumpling restaurant. I don't even know how she got the idea, wanting to open a dumpling restaurant in North London. My youngest teaches people, have a lot of relationship with their generation of Asian, and they don't have any, completely at ease with the culture and their culture at home. So, good job. 加油!
That's very good, yeah. Because part of the Western civilization is, apparently on decline. If you read a lot of commentaries, from the Sunday Times, Spectator, whatever, as Asian parents, what's going on in some government-sponsored schools, right? For example, for the Chinese, we never have any issue with transgender. There are some marvelous Cantonese opera singers and actors, who do the cross-play, right? So, I mean, it's different from 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, as Hong Kong Chinese landed in this country, we could have felt a little bit timid about our Asian root or whatever because of our colonial mentality, things like that. White men were born to take up the burden or that sort of mindset, but now it's going. It's gradually going, right? And thanks to, some ideological, radical change that's happening in some English-speaking countries. So it is time to reassert some of the Asian values as a British citizen in this country and try to get the best of both worlds. Right? I think part of the Asian or Chinese conservatism, right, combined with a reasonable degree of Confucian teaching will do good to the foreign children, to the future, to your future children and grandchildren. And it will be up to them to work out their own recipe to become good and balanced global citizens, right? And to contribute to this country with their future achievement, whether they will open their dumpling shops in North London or they join the city, and get back to Hong Kong to take out a couple of more buckets of gold from the mainland China if there's a chance. Whatever, so just feel relaxed and don't get obsessed with the issue of race and culture, that kind of things, right? So be spontaneous, be natural, and be authentic to yourself. I think that would be the best solution, and we have to define and recapture our define a new recipe of mixed or of cross-cultural survival, right? Make up your own fusion, and it would be interesting. Everyone's recipe would be a little bit different, but I think the principles would be are the same, right? Make up your own cocktail of cultural globalism and decide the right portion of Western and Eastern values. And then I'm sure you'll find a place somewhere, either in London, Birmingham, or Manchester, or even New York in the future. So don't let this become a burden or a chip on the shoulder whatsoever. The world is changing. China is changing. I mean, yes, Hong Kong has benefited thanks to the closed-door policy of China for 500 years, from the Ming Dynasty to the Qing Dynasty. That's why you had the early port of Quanzhou, right? That became one of the earliest export spots, where the Arabs and then the Spanish came to pick up products, and then followed by their own marine routes via Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, as represented by the galley of Manila, as I mentioned before. So I'm sure, money has been ruling the world, right? Although this is a word, Evan would not like to mention. I think Hong Kong has never been a colony of Britain. It's been a colony of money. It's been a colony of the god of wealth, right? There's nothing political about it, right? Is that true?
We all want to have a good life.
Of course. I mean, let's be frank,
Yeah.
right? We all had a good life. And Hong Kong has been used as a radical laboratory, cynically or unwittingly, by the British governments for more than 100 years to do a bit of a test there with the lowest tax system, with lowest and fewest taxes, with the minimum social welfare system, and let the Chinese people work out their laissez-faire capitalism with as little help from the government as possible. And it worked miraculously well on the people of the Chinese, plus the British common law, right? And that has been the unique recipe for Hong Kong for the past 157 years. until, I think it would be unfair to say until the 30th of June of 1997. I think Jiang Zemin, gave it a bit of an extension, although in a very, rather, grotesque way, right? Right? And
that's a different thing.
yeah, different thing, So I think the Cinderella party, with hindsight, had not stopped, ended on the 30th of June of 1997, but it had ended something like 5 or 3 years ago. But I don't believe the closed-door policy on the part of China, right, could be a sustainable one. Sooner or later, they got their own people to look after, they got the people to feed, right? So I think for the future of Hong Kong, I remain cautiously pessimistic for the long term, but cautiously and rather greatly optimistic, for the long-term future. I think the status quo, the weird status quo now, could not possibly last long, right? So, we're all familiar with the fairy tale of Snow White, right? Snow White had a bite of the poison apple offered by her stepmother, and she lost consciousness, and she became asleep, right? I don't know, it was a fake death, whatever. Until the prince came on a horseback and gave her a kiss and breathed some life into her, right? And that was the case of Hong Kong in 1841. Captain Elliot was the prince, and now the princess, for some obvious reason, right, look a bit unconscious again. Let's wait.
I just want to say one thing to clarify. When I said something about wealth, getting rich, I was doing that as from the perspective of a historian. I have no wealth, no power, okay? But the thing is, if you remember the handover, the negotiation, all this talks was about the goose that laid the golden eggs, right? Whether you were Peter Wu on one side and you were New World Development on the other side, Tong Suk or Li Ka-shing, we're talking about money. But one thing that we should not forget, it's okay to make money, to get rich, but you got to preserve the wealth, accumulate the wealth, and protect that. What do we need is a legal system that actually is fair and it's working and is impartial. Now that actually was what Dr. Sun Yat-sen said in 1923 when he came back to the Hong Kong University, his alma mater, to talk to the students there. Because for thousands of years, the Chinese could not achieve that. The Brits achieved that with the system of Hong Kong in just about 50 years. Now, so that is, I think, very important that we should always remember. Now here in the UK, you need to make this system work, and you need to work hard and play hard and accumulate the wealth and educate your children and have good life and a lot of fun. And then I think it's something that we should cherish, right? Because once you get the money, and then you need to use the money well. And I would say for this whole history of Hong Kong, we did use our money well. Because any time when there was like a hurricane, a storm, or some kind of disasters, we always donate a lot of money. Like the people in Hong Kong, they are always very generous to help the people who needed help. So this is what I was coming from. It's not, it's nothing to do with me. I mean, we live very humbly in the UK, and then we continue to try to make ends meet. Do we have more people who would like to interact? Sorry. Before that, yeah, you're the next one, sir. And then Evan would have something to say.
No, just quite quickly, I just want to make 3 points, just in relation to what I've heard so far. The first point is what Chip was sort of saying about Hong Kong being a bit of an experiment. I think that's one perspective. The other perspective is that Hong Kong was just forgotten So in many ways, the low tax system that you had operating in Hong Kong with very minimal sort of welfare was frankly a Victorian system. Yeah. It was a Victorian system that continued through into the 20th century. Again, whether that's good or bad, or that's a totally another discussion. But obviously, looking at that system, I don't think there was any conscious attempt on behalf of the British government to sort of use Hong Kong as a laboratory for so it really, I think, was an oversight. The second point I'd like to make is just in relation to the rule of law and the importance of the rule of law, and I think this is coming up as we're sort of seeing at the moment in regards to some of the court hearings we're seeing in Hong Kong, and in particular in the Jimmy Lai case. Yeah. Now, what made Hong Kong so attractive was the fact that okay, well, the reality was, if you were sort of coming over from Guangzhou and you were setting up, and no matter how well-to-do your merchant company or trading company was doing, the Hong Kong Cricket Club was still being pretty snooty about membership. You had that side, no doubt, but then on the other hand, if you had a commercial dispute, you knew the courts were going to treat you equally. You knew you were operating in a society which, at least for the time, gave you a huge amount of freedom to express your opinion. That is why Hong Kong not only, was it everyone makes the thing, Chiang Kai-shek, you had Sun Yat-sen in his time in Hong Kong and things. Hong Kong was the bedrock for a lot of the nationalistic movements that occurred throughout Asia, whether we're looking at Filipino independence, the Hong Kong provided an ecosystem that was, for its time, remarkably free, which again drew people to Hong Kong. And I think for now, and the big concern I have personally, is saying, clearly what the Hong Kong government is trying to do now is to separate what they would consider to be sort of political cases with non-political corporate cases. But can you really make that separation? That's a big issue. And with Jimmy Lai, for example, the new official narrative of what has happened in Hong Kong in the last few years is that it is all a foreign conspiracy. I think everyone in this room knows how frankly absurd that is, and how it's just not backed up in facts. But the courts, because they're operating in Hong Kong, will have to frame things under that understanding. And what impact does that have on the rule of law and therefore Hong Kong's attractiveness moving forward? And that's something which I'm very concerned about. But the third point I want to make, which is a much lighter point, and I think it's coming back to the wonderful question and statement that was made earlier. For all of us, whether we're Eurasians or whether we're not, who are making our home now in the UK, please don't feel you have to choose between being British or being a Hong Konger. One of the wonderful things, and I think the strength of, really the British identity, is that it is, again, identify with Hong Kong as each of us individually does, and don't feel that, in doing so, we're somehow not being British or British enough. Allow our Hong Kong identity influence the way Britain relates to Hong Kong. Allow it to actually also shape the British identity as it moves forward. So what I can say is, if you're sitting at home and you're worrying, are my kids going to be too British or too Western? Really, a lot of the fundamental values are not really Eastern or Western. They're universal. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Evan. I think that gentleman.
I'm sorry. Well, first, I just want to appreciate the chance for giving me speak. And I do learn a lot that I didn't know. I was 19, now I'm 19. That I never knew about Hong Kong's history, that they never taught us when I was in Hong Kong's high school. I never know, or maybe they're just not intended to teach me so. Well, nevertheless, I want to address about money and identity. I think laissez-faire and the freedom of capitalist development is critical in Hong Kong's development, which leads to the culture and political contemporary situation. Yet, it do bring prosperity, but I think it also creates wealth inequality. If you're from Hong Kong or you heard about it, you know what cage home is about. Me personally, well, just like many people here from Hong Kong to UK, my father, he came from China to Hong Kong and he had me here, which brings all of us a legendary family lecture. Yeah, they will always tell you something about, yo, look, your father come from China to Hong Kong. He was swimming and tried to dodge those bullets from PLA soldiers. He didn't die. Why can't you study harder? I think this is like a common experiment for everyone, I think. Yeah, 80%. Yeah, but still, he is illiterate and doesn't speak English, can't count. He working as a driver, kind of for government, but not in dodgy way, like he didn't kill people. And yeah, he do have a decent earning. He had me. He afford me for this international studying for 4 years so far, which I appreciate. Also the ability of their status that Hong Kong can make ordinary people to have a better development. But still, like, what I see in a childhood is that people are rich. My family have a decent living, but they are always working and they can't have a break. And some people, like, just like the wealth division in here, like broke people like me, I go to Lidl. Rich Tory, they go to like Morrison. Yeah. Rich people, they can go to like supermarket, Marks and Spencer. And like, I was thinking like, if we build this country together, can't we be even more fair? Can't we at least eliminate the cage home and make homeless people less and less? But still, like, I'm just like talking about the situation. I can't give any answer apparently. And the second thing is about the identity. Just like I mentioned, my parents came from Hong Kong. Like swimming and kung fu shit. Go to Hong Kong, like me. Like I just take a plane, obviously, to UK. Intended to stay for 6 more years, because obviously I'm not a BNO holder. So I can develop my career in more peaceful and more helpful situation, environment, yeah. And I think this is what most of the people that came from Hong Kong to UK also suffered about. If your parents also come from China, like, we were just like immigrants forever, it seems. But what makes us different is that I think, like, what the guests talk about, like, those 3 elements, I think the most important one is the people. Yeah? People who give up their farms, like, okay, I have to be like racist kind of bit, because like, obviously I'm not Eurasian, I have to talk about Chinese immigrant in it. And we give up our farm, we give our family tradition, we might gonna get our family, in some trouble, I don't know, because it was communist rule apparently. And we did the same, and they do it for risk, for betterment, for the future, for themselves, and their descendants, and what they want to achieve. I can't give a conclusion, I'm not a prophet apparently, but I think things are going to be well. I see a lot of familiar places. 我係呢段時間未見到咁多香港人嘅。我本身對香港都相當悲觀，但係其實如果你諗深一層，大家都係有一個相同嘅靈魂。簡單啲嚟講，如果你唔去搏，你唔去有一個適應嘅能力，你唔去挑戰，你唔會喺呢度。所以香港文化同埋呢個信念會唔會消失？唔會，因為呢個係我哋嘅 national trait。Thank you.
I think we'll reverse and I'll try answering first. I mean, thank you very much for sort of sharing. And I think maybe on the 2 points, one, I think in regards to sort of identity, and 2, in regards to inequality. I mean, I think I sort of touched on, Hong Kong. Hong Kong was an exception, because I think Hong Kong, sort of economically, was able to continue a model which certainly, I think in much of the Western world would not be acceptable. Because I think Hong Kong, that sort of model created a level of inequality in Hong Kong which would cause serious problems elsewhere. It's also worth pointing out that, of course, Hong Kong's Gini efficient has increased substantially since 1997. So it's not just a case of a unfair colonial policy helping to enrich the colonial elite. I think there's something much deeper, much more structural in Hong Kong, and also it's not an issue which is unknown in Hong Kong. I mean, Leo Goodstad, who, it was something he very much took to heart, and again, one of the things which I just find very sad is that the way you deal with problems is you have to start by being honest about them. And in the 90s, when Patton was there, when Goodstad was essentially advising EXCO, we could look at the problems, not constrained by the politics of Westminster, not constrained by a political narrative that was, coming out from essentially an ideological party. Once we know what the problems are, I mean, I really wish we knew the solutions to sort of global inequality, and I think everyone knows it's a problem, and I think there's a lot of discussion around it. But again, the worry I have in Hong Kong is there seems now to be a lot of trends within government where the advisors to government, the people who are going into EXCO, please try and have that conversation with Regina Ip. Need I say more? So that's my concern there. And I think in the UK, absolutely there's structural inequality in the UK as well. I mean, there's a huge amount of inherited wealth, but what I would say is that again, it is a problem that the UK is aware of. It's on the agenda of high up on the agenda of both of the political parties. I'm not a member of any political party, I will add, but I have substantial contacts with both. So I think it's wrong to kind of, and this is where I do get concerned. It's by sort of the level of hate that we sometimes sort of see in our societies. Oh, it's a Tory thing. Oh, it's a Labour thing. When democracies work well, we identify a problem, and you may have a Conservative solution and a Labour solution and a Lib Dem solution. That's the way it works. But to try and sort of, when we get to the stage when people on either extremes of the right and the left start sort of denying that there's a problem, start twisting the evidence in order to sort of only see what they want to see, then I think we have a big issue. So I think if there's a contribution we can make, I'm sure, again, first of all, there's a lot of people thinking about it. It is a known issue, and I think the best thing to do is just try and focus on the solution, and not focus on hating those awful capitalist scumbags or whatever. And I guess on the issue of identity, I would just still sort of come back and say, there's so much we can sort of contribute, and it doesn't mean it's a contribution as a Hong Konger or someone who has a particular story. I mean, one of the most amazing things about the UK, and it's something I love about this country, is how many stories people here have. How many of your neighbours, I mean, how many of your neighbours actually, even the Brits tend to be a bit quiet, but a lot of them have really hard stories themselves. Even if you're living on a very leafy suburb in North London, where you might sort of think, oh, all the people there shop at Waitrose. That's one up from Morrison's. You'll be surprised how many of those people, came from escaping oppression, whether it's escaping fascism in Europe, escaping, the extremes of communism came over here again with nothing. And, I think if there's a tendency sometimes to get caught up and say, I'm a victim. If at some point in your life or if you've been able to live your life and not been a victim, all I can say is, good on you, because there's very few people I know who have had such an easy life.
I think we do have a kind of a time limit for this event, but given the situation, we still can have at least 2 sharings. But before that, maybe Chip has something to say? Okay. Any more, show me your hand. Yeah.
Right, I've been here 48 years, just 2 years shy of yours, right? What I would like to ask the panel, I've been back to Hong Kong about 15 years, but are we going down the route like the Jewish community, have our own close community, closely knit, and then keeping our traditions, like the Jewish people, which I very admire of, and really standing shiver down my spine with the Communist Party. What they are doing is ethnic cleansing us, the Cantonese people, right? I born and brought up in Tsim Sha Tsui, right? The whole block of building in Buckingdom, right, is all Shanghainese people. I could speak Shanghainese then, but not now, obviously. And the way I went back on holidays in 2005 in Shanghai, and none of them can speak Shanghainese. I think Hong Kong is going down that route. So I'm here, I've been back. I got no money, I got no arms, but as a semi-retired Hong Konger, I would like to contribute by supporting whatever needs to be supported. Are we going to go down that route, or are we going to be? So I would like to ask the panel.
Because we're the panel, so I would respond to that. Yeah.
Because you just mentioned.
Yeah, very quickly. I think I can share something with all of you here, because I came to work here in London, and I actually work in the city. By the way, when I say working in the city, it doesn't mean here, okay? It's the city of London, 1 square mile, where all the banks used to be, right? Before we have the Isle of Dogs and Canary Wharf, before we had that. The city of London, the bank station, Moorgate, Liverpool Street. So I was working there in the 80s. I lived like a local, ordinary person, a very young person among these colleagues from everywhere in the world. Hong Kong people are very diverse themselves. We don't have any identification, religion, or uniforms or anything. If you look at us, you cannot tell the difference. We're just one of the people here. But I would say, just keep Hong Kong in your heart. This is what I will share with you. Because I was born in Hong Kong. My father was born in Hong Kong. We grew up in Hong Kong, right, with everything around us, like when Evan was talking about the Eurasians. My ideas of Eurasians were people like Uncle Ray or no, I'm sorry, and then Eileen Ryder. Right, she's more Eurasian. I think Uncle Ray may be just the Portuguese, perhaps. But for me, they said, okay, let me tell you, very tricky. My father told me there are only 4 people in Hong Kong, 4 types of peoples in Hong Kong. Those who are Europeans are the Guai-Lo, and those who are very dark are the Acha, and those who are Chinese but could not speak Cantonese, hey, Lao Song. And the rest are us, right? So 4 types of people in the whole universe. So it's very easy to deal with that. But basically, I would say, but then growing up, we know the kind of the huge, whole spectrum of people. When I moved to London, or maybe, I don't know, I will ask Chip when he moved to Warwick, and you in Oxford, we immediately at home. We never thought we were different. So carry Hong Kong at your heart. Come to London as one of them. By the way, I was on the bus. I was the only one who spoke English. Say, what the hell, right? So everybody is British here. We don't have to even speak English. So we are the most British at heart because Hong Kong was British for 158 years. Just do whatever you did in Hong Kong before and then try to make more friends and tell people proudly, you're from Hong Kong. I think that everything will be fine. I don't know.
Thank you. So I would just like to respond to the fairness question, because I came here about a little over a year ago, and it's just that recently I was talking to my friends, and I told them it's quite disheartening that I came from Hong Kong, which is like, what we all came from, like what we all ran from. And it's just that here I still see injustice, like inequality, like the young man just said, everywhere. And it's, like it eats away at me. But then, so I think my response to him is that, and like often when I talk to other Hong Kong people, they would tell me that it's not your struggle. Like people here, like their struggle is not yours, and we have our own burden that we carry. But it's hard because like where I work, and I see a lot of people struggling right now, are suffering a lot from, and I read about like few poverty and all that here in the UK, and it's just I can't just not see it, and it just makes me realize that it's maybe it's all one fight, and we can't just be laser focused on like political freedoms, liberty, and we have to think about how like Sun Yat-sen said, like people's livelihood is part of what like 三民主義, and there's like we can't just think about political freedom as one thing, and then the pursuit of happiness is part of it, like people's livelihood is part of it. So if people can't live, I wouldn't say well, but like with dignity, like what's the point of the rest? So that is kind of like my, I don't know, respond. It's not very organized to that young man, and of course I would hold on to my Hong Kong identity, my identity as a Hong Konger. That is more important to me than anything else. But I would also like to open my eyes to problems that I hear and start to like, not just think about my own struggle, my own burden, but it's not like what you've been talking about, like global citizenship, that kind of thing, but also addressing the wealth inequality, even in our own community, even in Hong Kong here in the UK. There's that problem. It's kind of buried because we have a lot of other things going on, but just that it's not very, organized. So whatever you have to say to that, I will appreciate. Thank you.
Hi, I mean, there is injustice, there is inequality, there is suffering everywhere. And I think as human beings, what dignity really means is having the freedom to call it out. If you see it here, I 100% support you to getting involved, to calling it out. But I think we have to sort of realize that the situation here is quite different to what we were facing in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, we weren't, I think, running away, at least principally, because of those injustices and because of inequality. We were running away because we were having our voice taken away to even speak about them. We were running away because when we spoke about them and we made a noise, we were being arrested and we were being told that we were agents of foreign powers. Here in Britain, like in all countries, Britain has its fair share of problems. But I think it's important that we make a very clear distinction between what problems are genuinely institutional and those which are not. And I think that, to me, what I can say to you is I fully support you. In Hong Kong, I used to do some work with SOCO. I know all about the cage homes. Just to give you, in case sometimes there's a misunderstanding about my background, you know, I'm not a wealthy financier or wealthy investor or anything like that. I built my career actually looking at issues on sustainability and social welfare in Hong Kong. So I fully appreciate, you know, how things are. Now, I also got involved in Hong Kong, and this is what got me in trouble, in the media. And the reason why I got involved in the media was because in Hong Kong, when we didn't have the ability to vote, we didn't have the ability to really put pressure on the government to address our concerns. What mattered even more was having that voice through the media. Now, in colonial times, Hong Kong had a pretty vibrant media.
Yeah.
It really did. And the media not only spoke about those problems, but they spoke about, coming back to the thing I know, they spoke about the different opinions and the different perspectives of different identities, different Chinese identities. Whether you were, you know, pro-KMT. When I was growing up in Hong Kong, there were whole sections of Hong Kong that were covered in the Taiwanese flag and the KMT flag, or very quickly removed. But we had that ability to talk, and we also had a sense that we had a good enough government. It wasn't just administrative efficiency, which I think everyone here can say Hong Kong is miles better than the UK. But it was the sense that there was an old government that did enough and gave enough signals to say, we're listening. Even if we can't solve those problems, we're listening and we're trying to do something about it. On the thing about Hong Kong people wanting money, remember what Patton did? When Patton came and he took up the governorship and wanted to push through the constitutional reform package, he was, in a nutshell, told by all the Hong Kong elite, outside of 2 or 3 sort of tycoons, basically he was told, Hong Kong people don't care about any of these things. They don't care about welfare. They don't care about political reform. You know, or the only thing Hong Kong people care about is money, maintain an environment to be able to make more money. And what did he do? He went to the people, and polls came back, you know, consistently showing that actually Hong Kong people did care, that they did want reform, and they supported his reform package. So it was those sort of things. Now, what I would then say, and this is, for me, this is why I feel I've lost a home in Hong Kong. Do I think the Hong Kong government today would do that? Do I think the Hong Kong government today, look what they're doing to our press? Do I like Apple Daily? Frankly, not a lot. It's a tabloid. Frankly, they went after some personal friends of mine. I've got a lot of personal reasons not to like them. But the point is, you've still got to keep things open to be able to talk. So what I would say is, you know, come here For sure, Britain has its problems. Find that cause. Being a Hong Konger doesn't mean you ignore those problems. And I admire you, and I will, support you in whatever way personally I can if you want to take up that challenge and advocate. But remember, the good thing, and this is the good thing about Britain, is we can advocate for that. We can vote. We can get involved. We can write to the press. We can get our things published. We can have these conversations. We can convene a meeting and talk about it. And we know that, the police are not outside with batons.
In the interest of time, we do have some discipline. So we can do only one more sharing. So, yes.
Thank you. We have been to Britain for just 13 months. As you can tell that my English still have a heavy Hong Kongese accent. So anyway, I would like to say that to me, history is all about narrative and discourse. What I'm worrying is that in Hong Kong, China is going to rewrite the history. As you may know that the history of museum has been updated, and then in last year, some high power, superpower in Far East has started to say that Hong Kong has never been a colony of Britain. What I'm worried that one day the Victoria Harbour is no longer named as Victoria Harbour. I hope that maybe some people with good connections, with good influencing power in Britain can use their effort to build up something more permanent, like a venue, a place, anything that we can write our own history, that we can present our own history in our own way, like this one, like the Hong Kong Festival, and then we can tell our own story instead of other voice tell their version of story with a stronger voice. That's what I really hope for.
Here I can actually respond on behalf of all the organizers of the Hong Kong Festival. The reason why we're doing this is because we do not believe that history is only narratives or discourses. We do have some factual things that we can carry on with all these exhibitions we have, but we need resources, right? So we are not satisfied with doing once in a year Festival of Hong Kong. We like to have a permanent venue and then ongoing activities to just carry on and sharing our experiences and stories of Hong Kong and what have you. So that's why I would actually ask all of you that you, on top of donating to this event, you bear in mind that people like Calvin and the rest of the organizers and people who participate, they would carry on and doing everything we can to share the stories and culture and history of Hong Kong. And whenever it's needed, we got to get all our resources together, and then we need to build something that is more permanent and more long-lasting. This is something, bear in mind, we will see each other again from time to time. And if we would do another thing in the UK as vis-a-vis the SAR government in Hong Kong telling their own narratives and whatever discourses, and nobody would listen to them, because here is where the truth is. Here is where the facts are, okay? So, because we do really actually run out of time, but since you've been quiet, I got to force you to say something, to give us some encouragement before we end this event.
Well, I mean, thank you very much. It's been a very pleasant gathering. What I can say is, yes, I mean, wherever you are, this is where Hong Kong is, right? And just stay robust and stay optimistic. I mean, don't let tragedies that may have happened recently, such as the suicide case recently, in Richmond. Don't let these news stories, burden you mentally so much because, yes, I mean, these are tragedies, but they have been politicized and magnified by some hostile political forces in Hong Kong. And all I can tell you is, in this country, there are 8.6 million people suffering from depression and on drugs, right? Anti-depression drugs, 8.6 million people. And altogether, on drugs, whether they are on drugs or not, 1/6 of the population in this country suffer from depression. So, I mean, if you feel occasionally anxious or unhappy, remember you're not alone. And there are organizations and clubs, gatherings like this. We can get together regularly and just like that girl there, speak out your mind. I mean, all I can tell you is that you benefit from the position that of being so young. Time is on your side, and so, I mean, you have to face it. This is life, right? And life is precarious. The Cinderella party would end somewhere, for most of us, right? For everyone, So just get on with it, and stay hopeful. And as I told you, I don't think this weird status quo in Hong Kong and China is going to last long, because it's against the very fundamental values of human nature. You can't close your door and shut down and then keep 1.3 billion people happy and not hungry. It's not going to last long. They're going to change, right? And there are some signs of some mild changes. I don't believe in one emperor ruling a country with 1.3 billion people, for more than 300 years, like the Ming Dynasty. I think 3 years or 5 years would be the best. I'm watching the situation in China very closely and keeping myself informed. And also reach out to some of the Chinese people from the mainland, because at this time, don't underestimate them. They have some very strong feelings, just like you, only because they dare not to speak out. We have some common goals, I wouldn't say common enemies, and they get isolated, they got stranded in Japan, in America, and in Britain. They kind of go home, right? So talk to them, right? And instead of treating the mainland Chinese as aliens. No. That's what I have been describing, some cultural traits of the Chinese people 3,000 years. But it doesn't mean that I write them off altogether. Right? So, I mean, keep a balanced mind and get together from time to time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chip. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so everything has to end when even the good things. But we meet again. We have events like this from time to time, and just stay tuned. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I've been meeting some mainland Chinese people in this country and some all over the world. I have been hearing some very interesting stories. And the people from the mainland I've been talking to, they all love Hong Kong. They feel so strongly about it. They think Carrie Lam has been so stupid, and they hate the whole bureaucrats, the whole bureaucrats regime in Hong Kong, thinking that they are stupid. They are very clever, two-faced people. They know what the situation in China is like, and they know it's not going to last long. So just remember, be water, and reach out to those people and get them united, rather than stay divisive. Right? Thank you.
Thanks, Chip, and thanks, Evan. And we need a lot of donations. I mean, we're still not break even yet, right? So this is the second last day of the event. We have donation boxes there. We have souvenirs for you to take a look and purchase and just help us out. The fact that we're all here, the fact that Chip is here, Evan is here, that I think it tells you very clearly we have hope in the UK for all Hong Kongers, right? So see you later.
We need to hear this.
可以吧？
Yeah, been what? How are you doing?
Thank you, everyone.
We need to
When you finish today.
we need to, you know.